This is Battlefield 4. We're here on Xbox Series S taking a look at this very well-loved entry in the Battlefield series. We're starting with a little bit of the campaign just so that you can see it in action, and then we'll be moving on to the multiplayer portion of the experience. So what are we benefiting from here on the Series S? Well, it actually goes toe-to-toe with the Series X, running the game the exact same. So what are we getting? 720p. Which is, quite jagged around the edges. I think more so you even notice that in the multiplayer, but in the campaign it's present too. And we do benefit from a default on FPS boost running at 120 FPS. So it's not necessarily like fully hitting that, but you know what? We're getting a far more fluid experience than we were getting on the last generation consoles, and that is fantastic. Auto HDR is also present in this one, so yeah, it feels really great. So I can't record 120, I can't display it, YouTube doesn't support 120, but I am actually going on here using the DVR on the Series S, which is incredibly hit or miss, in order to record and play and talk about the experience while actually having 120 FPS going on. So yeah, it feels really great, and it's just like it's kind of jagged around the edges, but I mean if you're using the Series S, I think it's less of a gap than if you're like on the Series X side of things, if that makes sense, in comparable games and whatnot. So I just thought this was something that would be, kind of a good showcase, give you a little bit of a look at it. Like the edges of the gun even look jagged, which is kind of funny. But I think this one kind of holds up decently. The campaign's alright. It's about like some escalating, global tension and issues, and you're kind of thrown into it. So there's like a big moment where you make a crazy decision. You kind of get to know your squad, and you have to fight through these different scenarios, and it's Battlefield 4. It's a well-known game. It's something a lot of people have a lot of fun with.
Grab what you can and cover off on the window.
Grab what I can? What? I don't want to grab. I don't need anything. I just want to fight, guys. Jeez, let's just battle here. I'm trying to talk. Anyways. So the campaign's okay. It's got some decent stuff to it. I think it's got some neat moments. It's okay. That's a lot of like the Battlefield campaigns. They're fine, they're enjoyable, they get the job done. I did like the style, the backdrop. I did think it was actually kind of neat, the whole scenario for conflict around here, and I'm not sure these are factions we'll really see, being allowed to be in like conflict games that, for quite a while due to like, global partnerships and stuff. So this one is actually quite neat, and then again, having that higher frame rate here is fantastic. It makes such a huge difference. Again, keep in mind though, for the 120 FPS, you do also need a TV that supports it as well, right? Otherwise, you're just getting that original experience, but, it feels, and, things almost look way better when they're played at a higher frame rate, which I think is something that a lot of folks don't appreciate, is just having that, like, fluidity level going on. It feels much better gameplay-wise to be able to enjoy that. So let's get going. I guess the safe house ain't so safe. Let's roll. And again, we're just showing off a little bit of it before we switch to the multiplayer, just so you get a feel for things. But yeah, there was kind of a little bit of an atmospheric opening and stuff on this one. I think it actually was a fine campaign. I think you can have some fun with it. I think it's worthwhile playing today. It's not too terribly long, and it's enjoyable, and it's got some neat characters and some moments you'll forget a lot of them, but some of them you won't forget, and that's kind of the special part of it, is the enjoyment of the conflict as you battle around against these factions, trying to get the job done with this team. It's got a neat sense of, like, particle effects and things popping up in the air and that, which was really cool. And then the slightly, I guess you would say slightly futuristic, but modern combat style. And I think that did work well for it. Different difficulty options, too, if you're dying because you're being a little too ambitious and going out there. Oh, and it does load faster, too, which is quite nice. That's a big improvement there. It's just the loading. How did you not notice me this time? The last time you did. That's a bit weird. What can I say? But, yeah, campaign kind of neat, kind of worth checking out. I hope you kind of got your fill of what it's looking like. Wow, why was my ammo empty? So I'm going to die again. But I think at that point, we should probably switch over to the multiplayer. I think that makes sense. So this is the multiplayer portion of the experience, and this is where we most benefit from that higher frame rate. Again, it's probably not going to be like a perfectly solid 120 FPS, but once you start getting up into those numbers, it's going to be less likely that you're going to notice that sort of thing when you come to play the game. The biggest thing, though, is your response time, your gameplay experience, and how you react to what's going on is just greatly improved when you have a higher FPS going on. Especially for these older titles, it gives you a fantastic advantage. We get the full scope of 64-player action, some of the most iconic Battlefield maps, great combat, whether you are wanting to do something that is a bit more, infantry focused, something a bit more like, vehicular, whether you're in, the sky in a helicopter, or maybe a plane or a jet, or, stuff like that. I keep saying that word. I don't know that phrase. So, yeah, be in tanks, be in quads, blow things up with different kind of weapons and tools that you have, lots of stuff to unlock, different tools to use across those classes, and you just play a bunch of different modes. It seems Conquest is kind of the biggest last standing thing, though there are a couple deathmatch options here or there for smaller player counts. But yeah, you can always find large 64-player servers that are still active and full of people, which is fascinating that this one just does never seem to die out. It's just incredibly well loved, and I mean, this was really quite some peak multiplayer action from the Battlefield series. It absolutely delivered for its time, and it's something that you can clearly see with so many people still playing it, that it continues to be an incredible experience all these years later. I mean, we do streams and stuff for it too all the time as well, because we just can't escape this title. But no, I have fun with it, and I mean, it does look quite rough. I mean, this one, if we could get some little resolution bump ups for this, that would be fantastic, right? Because it's quite jagged around the edges, and some of the stuff's not too sharp. But having that higher level of fluidity, I think actually makes this look a little bit better, a little bit smoother. It feels a lot better. And I know you're not getting the full effect of that, obviously, just due to how recording and everything works for higher frame rates in this day and age, but hopefully at some point down the road, I'll be able to almost like revisit this stuff and even provide it at a higher frame rate option and that. But it's fun to talk about it and just showcase it, just so you can kind of see maybe a little bit of a, how much smoother everything is for me. It's almost like a down frame rate sampling type concept that I like to mention, but, obviously you're not getting the full scope of what I'm feeling when I'm playing around in here. Like, it feels so good for panning and moving around. It's just like a phenomenal change up to this experience. And I mean, I've played quite a bit of this game, and I know others have played way more. You see so many people with like just maxed out to the max levels, and people just consistently playing this game since it released so many years ago. It's amazing, especially like, again, coming from with this first launch, seeing it there and being like boom, blown away, and having it once again kind of blow my mind with a higher frame rate. It's so neat, because I saw that on the 360 where I was like, oh wow, this is really neat, this is expansive. And then going to the Xbox One, I was like, wow, this is like groundbreaking stuff. This is a phenomenal upgrade over what I'm used to experiencing. It's crazy, and it's just wild to once again have that standard sort of blown further, where I'm like, oh, it's even better now, which is nice. Now, if only at some point we could also, like I said, get that resolution really going, and I think this would continue to be, well, that's also probably a problem, is we'll never leave this game if they make it look too good, right? That's the funny part here. The epic action, the balanced sort of multiplayer, the different tools and weapons and dynamics of play. Everyone's almost really well set up. I don't think you'd have an issue jumping in and kind of learning the ropes and getting used to it now, but it is something where it's like, these people have played, they know this game, they know it very well, I myself too, and that is kind of a little bit of a mountain to jump over, because they're so well set. Like, look, I'm like level 60 something, but let's just jump into the next match here. So this is our next map set up here. We've got a resort that needs to get blown up. I always like the sense of scale in these Battlefield games. I don't like the static sky, though. It's really sticks out all these years later really badly. But, you know, the action and the intensity of combat never gets old as we go to fight for these positions and fight for our particular actual faction, you know? They actually went for a little bit more of an authentic combat back in the day. And they still had some cool destruction, and this one had the whole levolution thing where it's like, oh, you can knock down this big building, or oh, you can knock down this massive dam, or this, I don't know, they had all kinds. There's like one with a flood, and you know, they got all kinds of different stuff set up here for different maps and areas where you want to cause mass chaos and action, insanity, and everything like that. It's pretty cool. So, to tie together, we've got a campaign that I think you could still enjoy today, and, you know, it's kind of neat. It's got some visceral stuff to it. It's got some cool set scenes and set pieces, and a different sort of war that I guess kinda gets continued in the later Battlefields, but not really. Yeah, and then you've got a multiplayer that is still pretty much a big standard for the Battlefield series years later, shooters-wise. Like, at least large-scale multiplayer-wise, I'm not too sure we've had many experiences really, you know, surpass. Wow, those guys are nice. You would think all these years later people would grow up. But anyways, you know, it's something in the series that I don't think too many people have, you know, kind of left or thought of in any sort of negative way. They just love this one. And that love will never seem to die, apparently. So yeah, I like it. It's great. It's phenomenal. It plays well. The fluidity is fantastic. If you want, you know, to have a lot of multiplayer fun with big vehicle combat or do infantry type things, there's a range of everything, you know. That was another thing that was really impressive about this game. Was not only, you know, that we have like large scale battles, but we also had maps that had different functionality. Some of them were more infantry focused, some of them were more like, you know, we had like one that was a little bit more aquatic focused with the flood going on. We've had maps that are a bit more vehicle like. You know, there are actually quite a few different map setups, and there was a lot of DLC, but you rarely see the DLC stuff. And I think most of the DLC stuff is actually kind of free on this one too, which is kind of neat to think about. Or I believe to some degree it is. It's hard to tell with these older titles. But yeah, it's usually just the main things. You see a lot of Goldman, you see a lot of love for Hurt Locker, which makes sense because that map is just like a cluster of death and chaos and intensity. But that's the fun of it. It's just like going back here and, you know, either reliving these battlefields or checking them out for the first time and seeing just the crazy range that's present. But I don't really have any more details to go over. I've talked about the game and the combat, so just enjoy more of the experience, I suppose. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add. Series S, it's running as good as it's gonna run, I would imagine. So hopefully someday we see some other maybe improvements visually, which would be nice resolution-wise. But you know, having 120 FPS, I don't think I can really complain too much. It's just, yeah, it does look quite jagged around the edges here or there, but fluidity-wise, pretty smooth indeed.
Soldier just due north of your position. Objective Bravo is lost. attacker. Just west of your current location, there appears to be an enemy machine gunner. Be advised, just neutralize objective Bravo. Hey soldier, where you going? We need you over here. Okay, listen up. We have neutralized objective Echo. We have taken objective Echo.